I know. I'm not the challenge run guy. I've made myself known for videos that are effectively slapping Starbreeze across the face and telling them how to make their game what it should have been when it released, or at least that's what I hear. But while I step back from more thought-provoking Payday videos, I thought I'd take a stab at a fun idea that I haven't been able to get out of my head, that being Agent 47 in Payday. He's not a crossover character, and I doubt it'll happen soon, if at all, but I can dream. In reality, though, I'll be emulating the abilities of the elusive bald man as best as I can within Payday 3, and push my stealth skills, and my patience, more so the latter, to their realistic limit. For this challenge run, I'll have to complete every available Payday 3 heist, barring the smash and grabs, on overkill difficulty while also being limited to the build that you're seeing on screen right now. This is primarily a loud build, as you might be able to tell from looking at the skills equipped, and that's mostly from trying to recreate the skill set of the silent assassin himself, and realizing that he's only as stealthy as his disguises let him be. If he never changes from his suit, it's far more difficult to get around undetected. Besides, he's an assassin. He should be good at killing. For the weapons, I'm using as best as possible recreations from the world of assassination games, with the primary Reinfeldt 880 shotgun being modeled to recreate the ICA tactical shotgun that's gotten me through quite a few freelancer missions whenever I needed a silent shotgun. In the sidearm slot, and what's primarily going to be used, is the jackknife pistol, modeled as best as possible to represent the iconic silver baller pistol. I couldn't quite get it as close as I wanted to, but it still gets the image across. I was considering having an alternative weapon for the primary be an assault rifle of some kind, but I realized it would ultimately be better if my weapons were just as limited as my choice of skills in this run. Plus, Payday 3 doesn't have enough bullpup rifles for me to try recreating the one I'd actually want to use, and it'd feel cheap trying to make one of these with a modified Car 4 or KU-59. Although I will give an honorable mention to the Seeger AR-552 from Hitman. I love the way this rifle is designed, and I'd love to have it in Payday at some point. Back to the rules. While I can still make use of my AI crewmates in solo mode, this is going to be a stealth-focused challenge run, so I'll only really be able to use their assistance on the 2 forced loud heists in the game. To add the Hitman flair to this challenge run, though, one extra rule I'll be adding to every heist I do is that I need to eliminate at least one target NPC. It can't be anyone random in most cases, as quite a few heists have semi-important NPCs for you to interact with regardless. The real challenge won't be killing them, it'll be killing them whilst remaining completely undetected in every heist that allows it, because there is one heist in particular where who my target is will force me to go loud at some point. But that's enough of a mission briefing at this point, as it's time for the bona fide Hitman of Hitmen to get his payday. Starting off in the recently revamped Secure Capital Bank, I started this run off by going on a usual run to the side room, seeing as that's the side I started off at, and it's a good thing I went this way as I immediately found the QR code I'd need for the upper floor. I am ashamed to admit how much longer it took me to find the power box, somehow managing to take the cameras down before I'd even progressed objectives. Fortunately, I did end up finding the power box and getting to the vault, where I needed to kidnap my first target, SCB's executive. Supposedly, he's been giving tips to whoever's willing to listen about how to enter the vault and how he'll split the cash with whoever helps him break in. Needless to say, someone like that can't afford to stick around. Fortunately for my patience, I had the idea to grab glamour shots of my target while I waited for him to move into just the wrong spot for him to be taken away to the retinal scanner, unlocking the manager's computer. First one's not it, maybe the second one? Nope, yep, that's it. Now I can use it without being spotted. Nope, okay, well, that's alright. I just need to make sure nobody sees these people in this office now that I have the code. There you go. Hope you guys are comfortable. While I made my way to the keypad and began to punch in the numbers, I was beginning to lament the limitations of this challenge run, as I couldn't bring an ECM jammer with me to disable the die packs. I'd made my distaste for those things well and clear in the past, but as I opened the door to make my way inside, luck happened to bless me as the vault was filled with gold instead. Even better, as I could use the gold as an excuse as to why my target was killed. While trying to steal the gold, his incompetence caught up to him and the gold crushed him to death. All in all, it was a very comfortable session of bagging, both in regards to the loot and my target. All that was left was to take my payment to the getaway, which, while gold may be heavy, it's no trouble to take for someone whose pockets are quite literally bottomless. How else does 47's inventory work? All in all, a simple job, and what I hoped was a sign of things to come. Continuing on with one of the few forced loud heists of the run, I started in Road Rage, or I would if my game didn't decide to crash on me immediately. Well, not like I lost much, the vehicle hadn't even shown up yet. While the setup for the armored transport was being done, I may as well explain the targets for this heist, and that's everyone working on the bridge, as all 8 of them are part of a group working to sabotage the infrastructure of the bridge under the guise of construction, and so must be eliminated. Turns out that's very easy to do when there's nobody else around, and once they're gone, someone needs to get the materials they are going to use for their own nefarious ends in the armored transport. This first attempt was going a bit rough as I got swarmed very quickly. This was a build that could handle loud heists as is one designed for assassinations, but crowds were a bit of an issue despite that as most assassinations are only on a single person. I started getting a bit swarmed by the time I'd gotten the transport to the ramp to start drilling into it, getting downed and brought back up by my AI crew over and over, peppered by sniper fire to boot, and with my overkill weapon way too far away for me to make use of it. As such, I went down shortly after entering the armored transport to try and loot it with my crew following suit shortly after. I had a glimmer of hope as I saw a cloaker enter the map with only a handful of seconds on my revival timer. I thought I could kill him to activate Bounty Hunter Ace and get back up, but it wasn't meant to be as 47 collapsed in the armor transport. Attempt 2 did go a bit better from the jump as I pivoted a bit in my strategy once the cops showed up to keeping snipers from getting too comfortable while taking care of the closer threats with my knives. Throwing things that stab people is something of a hobby for 47 after all. And with the overheal that knife kills gave me with this build, things were going smoothly so long as I could keep it up and retrieve the knives, which was a bit more difficult than it should have been because I had to keep moving with the transport. Just in case, I did put each of my motion sensors on the front and sides of the transport so I'll be able to take better advantage of all the skill points in the pistol tree. Of course, for that to actually be useful for me under such consistent pressure, I'd also need to be risking my armor for that minuscule amount of healing, as the motion sensor's limited range kept me from getting that as consistently as I'd like. With my knife supply running low and going down twice when Snaters entered the heist, I put my first medic bag down on the road the transport was taking to the ramp. Once I'd managed to get my broken armor back from a techie that tried to hide in the nearby tower, the transport was back on the road and getting to the destination at about the same time as the wave ended, giving me some room to breathe and get some ammo and knives back before drilling the underside of the transport to try and get in. It was still going much more smoothly than the last attempt, even as I fell to a sniper and I tried to retreat from the oncoming dozer wave, just barely making it out of there alive thanks to the AI crewmates, but being pushed back far enough to deploy my second and final medic bag behind the best cover I could manage, praying this wouldn't come back to haunt me, as I survived as long as possible with the AI going into custody one after another. They came back just in time, as it turned out, as they managed to save me before I was chased up the central tower by a very determined bulldozer, with nothing but my silver baller to protect me. But after he gave me one of my downs back, my crew was being enough of a distraction for the cops to let me lockpick the armored transport in peace, getting the 6 minimum bags of the minerals to the chopper, and then making a mad dash for the escape as my AI sacrificed themselves yet again, and with no armor or downs left to my name. What I hadn't anticipated was that the medic bag I'd placed earlier was actually in the perfect spot for me as I was getting away, using the rest of the charges it had to give myself enough of an overheal buffer and more downs to get to the escape, as I couldn't really fight back with only 5 bullets left in my pistol and a shotgun with no skills to boost it. But once I went down those stairs, the job was as good as done. There might have been a lot more bodies than I wanted, but a job's a job, and this one was certainly finished with no room to spare. Ashton Fine's main store is one I'm pretty familiar with at this point, going through it countless times when I leveled up my weapons, so it should have been easy enough to get in, steal the loot I needed, and get out. Which, yeah, that part was simple. Get into the VIP area, kill the target inside the VIP room for reselling the jewelry they pickpocketed from the store, and escape with the manager, who, fun fact, does actually have a name, and that's Riley Larson. Why kidnap and not just kill her? Well, it's for the simple fact that she reappears in future heists, so I can't exactly kill her off in only the 3rd heist of the game. Of course, the actual challenge of escaping with Riley in tow wasn't getting the 5 VIP bags and the 1 opal that I persuaded someone to help me with, or disabling the cameras. It was just waiting for this guard to get into a tolerable spot for me to walk her to the van. After what felt like forever, I thought I had an opening to escape, but peripheral vision scorned me as I had to spend 2 radios I couldn't exactly afford, and while technically this was a clearance stealth, the alarm was blaring while I escaped. But just in case, I did the heist again to make sure it counted, making sure not to break stealth at the last minute on accident again. The Neon Cradle nightclub is similar in terms of how much I've actually done it, or so I thought at least. In this heist, I had 2 targets. The club's manager, Rifkin, and the accountant, whose real name can't be Maximo Avila. That's just a stage name, right? Right? Either way, this wasn't going all that badly on the first attempt, save for the placement of the VIP invite scanner, which I did take note of on my way to the Rifkin's office, but once I got in, my luck face-planted hard when I needed to get Rifkin's QR code, being led into a sort of chain reaction of getting caught in the front of the club and being escorted right back out. So much to the point that it might as well have been that one meme from The Simpsons. You know the one. After being escorted in and out about 5 separate times, I was scanning the VIP passes, and at the last possible second of the interaction, a camera panned over to me. Seeing as the slippery skill doesn't exist anymore and I couldn't get myself out of cuffs when I was put in them, I had to restart at this point. Attempt 2 was going significantly better as I managed to get to Rifkin's office more quickly than last time, managing to catch her spawning in the hallway near her office, eliminating the target, and then waiting for the QR code to be scanned. Since the VIP scanner spawned closer to the office this time, it was significantly easier to get the passes verified, getting a little bit greedy in the secure area before getting access to the VIP area, swiping the blue keycard as well as the 5 total paintings before heading down. With the painting secured, the goal now was to figure out where Maximo was and get him to the crypto wallet room for an inconspicuous removal. Though the cheapest cocaine in the game didn't hurt to be grabbed either. Since I wasn't masked up, it was very easy to grab all of the loot I needed in the area, skimming through the accountant's office to see what possible vault codes there were before going to the man himself and having Shade give him a call to get him to the IT room, before realizing, as the door slammed in my face, that I had forgotten to grab the red keycard to go in after him without masking up. Desperately, I rushed back to the office to try and grab it in time, but to no avail as he was already leaving when I grabbed it. It was fine, though. I just had to follow him to the relatively inconspicuous spot he went to and planned one of the most unnecessarily risky knife throws I've ever done. As I went up to examine my handiwork, a guard also happened to notice through the rafters that he was dead, and the alarm sounded shortly after. Another restart. Attempt 3 went about as well as the first 2 had by this point, getting to Rifkin's office and being escorted out shortly after as she spawned outside this time, swiping the blue keycard while I was being escorted and getting Rifkin's QR code, trying to put a motion sensor on her to keep track of her, but having to spend both of them as I had accidentally put it on the door. Hopefully I wouldn't need that one. I really shouldn't have tried to use it on her anyway, as she immediately headed back to her office where she fell over with the help of a knife. Despite the VIP pass scanner being in the same location as Attempt 1, I managed to stay just out of sight of it, getting the VIP passes again and heading downstairs with all 5 paintings for getting to secure 3 of them. I'd be back with them later though, as right now the priority was making sure I didn't forget that red keycard again, finding all the possible codes, getting their keycard inside the safe, and dropping down into the next room to find the vault, putting the code in straight away. I made my way to the door to try and leave when I was faced with the message that I couldn't lockpick from this side, being extremely confused because it was just a wooden door. Bug or not, I had to mask up to get out, which wasn't the end of the world. I just had to be more careful securing all the bags and not get caught by a guard like that. That's okay, just don't let anyone see him. Where's the spot to hide the body? Oh, I know, the vault! Yeah, I'll just leave his body here, forcing him with my shotgun a bit to make sure he's not found. 1 radio left, and I could very easily use that in the camera system, seeing as it was being a nuisance removing these bags to the secure point. After all the money was secured and grabbing whatever else was loose in the club, I looked in what I thought was every room, trying to find Maximo to no avail, until I went into the 1 room that was left, finding him and the 2 gamblers going at it, knocking those 2 unconscious and making sure Maximo was ahead of them both. Quite the sharp mind he had for a moment there. Both targets out of the way, it was time to get the crypto wallet. Using the supports on the side of the building, I found the proper power box, authorized it with the accountant's computer, and grabbed and secured the wallet, getting out of there pretty handily as my first all-bags heist of the run. I would have done it in no rest as well, but I wasn't feeling up to lockpicking all the deposit boxes. I didn't need to, regardless. Next was the art gallery heist Surphaze, which I wasn't the biggest fan of for quite a while, and I still don't enjoy it that much, despite the removal of those dreaded circles making it much easier to handle. My target for this heist was the art gallery's manager, as he'd created his own intricate forgeries of art pieces he's passed off as other people's. The second goal was to grab each of these 4 paintings and bring them out of the gallery for further examination. Getting into the gallery itself isn't much of a challenge, especially with how much easier mantling is when you're masked up, but the real issue with this was going to be getting the paintings back out of the gallery. After all, I couldn't use favors, so I didn't have a zipline bag to make moving the bags more convenient. First things first, though, I needed to find at least 2 QR codes for 2 of the downstairs displays, while also making sure I found the camera room server room first, getting the cameras down and making sure I had the spectrophotometer ready and waiting. I also managed to find the manager's office rather quickly, eliminating my target in his office and grabbing the flash drive I'd need later, making sure to check the PC as well to see exactly where I needed to go. I didn't want to spend more time in here than necessary. Knowing where I needed to go now, I got to working on the downstairs security bars, letting the timer go down while I was waiting to grab the first painting, quickly but cautiously getting into the van before going back in for the supposedly bloodstained paintings by Petra Vicario. This meant I'd need to retrieve the spectrophotometer as well as remove the security bars on the paintings, as I could open up the necessary rooms while waiting for those to lower. I'd also somehow managed to find out which of the Ledette paintings I needed before I'd even gotten to the previous step, getting ready to take that painting away with some close calls, but nothing that truly stopped the run. At least until I got into E6, where I got far too greedy for my own good with my timing and jumped right onto the trap floor, triggering the alarm and causing a restart. Attempt 2 started similarly to the first, with much of the same RNG as well with where things were. Manager's office found, the manager came, and then he went. Then I left to get to the room that had ruined my last run, being much more careful this time to not jump too far, disabling the security inside before following suit with disabling the cameras, grabbing the spectrophotometer before realizing I should probably disable the security bars too, getting that started while I worked on unlocking more of the exhibition rooms. I found the Ledette painting first in E4, bagging it so I could move it out later, also making sure to grab the Vicario painting in E6 so I could grab them both at the same time. Once I got downstairs, the guards began to give me trouble with where they were, as the guard outside had decided to park himself right outside, leaving me with no choice but to distract him with a thrown knife, which, as it turns out, was just seen by the lead guard, leading me to restart the heist once again. On attempt 3, I decided to start with a different approach. Instead of masking up, I decided to try going through the front courtyard, which worked far better than I expected it to, even getting to the point of disabling the cameras before masking up, though I did mentally slap myself for not seeing the downstairs security bar panel as I walked in. It was literally right there, and I just went right by like a dunce. Oh well, one roundabout trip later and I was disabling the security with a good bit of patience, placing a motion sensor on the lead guard to keep tabs on him, and then grabbing the first painting without much hassle. Knowing I wouldn't be able to do that with the upstairs room, I decided to mask up and go for the 2 rooms that always had the Ledette paintings, unlocking E7 and E4 from inside, finally finding the manager's office in the process, and seeing that I'd need to go into all of the upstairs rooms anyway. Well, that's one less step to repeat at least. Once again, I worked on getting the security bars for the upstairs disabled, looking around for where the manager could be, and wondering why it was taking him so long to go to his office compared to previous attempts. I decided to disable the remaining rooms in the meantime, and once he was back in his office, his fate was sealed, just like that hole in his neck. From that point, it was a fairly simple matter of getting the 3 paintings I needed to the van, and once that was done, I was completely in the clear. This heist is a lot more tolerable when you're not trying to grab everything, surprisingly. Sharke's bank is one I'm fairly familiar with as well, so going through it shouldn't be much of an issue, even with the 2 targets inside. My first target was Eric Yeager, the superior with access to the upstairs section of the bank, as well as the fellow who holds onto the blue keycard in that upstairs area. Sharke's competitors have discovered some money laundering and fraud that these 2 are in charge of, so they want the assets seized and individuals responsible taken care of, and that's what I'm here to do. I started by making sure I had a route ready to get to the van for securing all of the money with a QR code, grabbing a second one to enter Eric's office before giving them real rich treatment. He's gonna sit with that headache for a while. I, on the other hand, was heading upstairs, trying my luck with a random code to no avail before trying to see where my next target was, as well as the server room I needed to figure out what the code was. After being escorted out and walking right back in, I found my target in the server room, getting that long timer done so I could not have to worry about it, getting lucky with the side room, and playing the second half of the waiting game, at some point realizing I should probably put a motion sensor on my target so I don't lose track of him. Entering the code and going into the vault room, I took down the cameras as well as the other guard roaming the area so I'd have an easier time getting to the switch boxes, as well as possibly my target when he wandered into a good position for me to get rid of him. But that was something I'd worry about later, as now I needed to go back and forth, making sure I'd flip the right switches to get into the vault and then loot it, getting the server that contained the evidence of the fraud, as well as beginning the long process of moving all of those bags to the van, getting a small jump scare for a moment until I realized escorting a player out of a private area takes priority over guards seeing a suspicious bag. The more you know. Once all the bags were secured, though, it was time to go back up and eliminate my target, grabbing him and giving him as close to a drowning kill as I could manage, stuffing his drowned corpse into the bathroom stall and carefully making my escape with relative ease on the 3rd heist I'd cleared on my first attempt. This infamous shipping yard was one I wasn't expecting to spend that much time in, save for figuring out new ways to get around with the mantling system update Payday 3 provided, as well as my goal here being eliminating some illegal traders, trying to pass off their materials that they'd snuck into the shipping yard. Ultimately, I was here to eliminate them and retrieve the goods. Being admittedly a bit reckless, I masked up fairly quickly and climbed right in, enjoying the new mantling system and infiltrating the warehouse rather quickly, before realizing I also needed the QR codes on the guards outside to even get the goods. I tried getting those, but ultimately got caught and decided to restart early, even though I very likely could have salvaged that attempt. Discretion is the better part of valor, after all. The second attempt was a bit more cautious with how I started it, sneaking in through one of the side gates and getting to one of the guards with the QR codes I needed, snagging that before going for the other guard on the opposite end. Both QR codes in hand, I started work on actually getting into the warehouse and setting up the truck, scouring around and finding where my targets were, and starting to head there. At least until the guard inside saw me climbing like a monkey and I had to drop him, leading into a snowball reaction of a nearby civilian panicking who I had to keep from running away, but then the radio went off before I could move everything out of sight of the cameras, and that was pretty much it for attempt 2. Third burst, almost the same as the first. I went to the east side, grabbed the QR code, then worked my way into the warehouse, finding the right yard, setting up the nugget nitrogen, and pausing only to grab the west guard's QR code so I wouldn't need to come back later. At that point, I just had to get into the shipping yard, eliminate my targets, and secure the goods. It went pretty well, save for a couple of occasions where I got seen by a guard, but I was able to hide his body as well as the body of one of my targets, quickly enough that nothing bad happened from that. I also found a few extra bags of money lying around, but ultimately left them behind when I found the first container with the tech I needed, grabbing that and booking it back to my truck to get it out of there before going back for some of the cash I'd found, as well as the blue keycard to take down the camera system. Into the yard once again, I found my remaining targets and swiftly eliminated them, hiding them both in this convenient container, following suit with a third guard who unfortunately complicated things as his radio caused the heist to go into searching mode. But cooler heads prevail as I found the tech and made my way to the truck. Ultimately, I decided to fight against my greed, leaving the excess cash where I'd found it, leaving something else in place of that cool tech. It wasn't a perfect run, but it was as good as I could get given the circumstances. Next up was the final heist of this game's launch, infiltrating the penthouse of Mason Laurent. At least I don't need to be the one picking the target this time, the game can do that for me. The target for this one was pretty self-evident, being the owner of the penthouse itself, as he's wanted dead for his association with the Murky Water PMC. Infiltrating the penthouse was pretty simple, especially since, for once, I was able to actually destroy the cameras that were littered throughout the heist due to Titan cameras not being active, as well as permanently relieving the door guard from his duties, moving his body upstairs and entering through the vents anyway, mostly because I didn't want to deal with him while I was moving the bags through the heist. Getting to the bedroom wasn't difficult, but it did force me to drop the second guard and radio of the heist, giving him a nice bath while I hacked the routers to enter the bedroom, letting my patience take over so I wouldn't get caught. The process was slow but steady, finding and grabbing the lead QR code for the red keycard room, and waiting patiently outside to use it, then using that keycard to enter Mason's office when the delivery boy showed up for what has to be the most Hitman-accurate way of moving a target somewhere inconspicuous: poison. But in order to use the poison, I first had to find the poison. I'd been looking in each of the bathrooms once the whiskey delivery showed up, unable to find it when I remembered it also has a chance of showing up in the storage closet with 2 NPCs in front of it. A frequent pain point of trying to stealth this heist, and where I was afraid I'd have to enter searching. Fortunately, I'd managed to get the timing quite literally perfect, sneaking the 2 women into the closet and grabbing the poison, coming dangerously close to making that 3 in the closet before poisoning the drink and getting ready for Mason's arrival. I thought this when I first did this heist, and I'll say it again here. This is the closest Payday 3 and Hitman will ever be to each other in terms of their gameplay, even if one is about assassinations and the other is about assassinating a bank account. But with Mason poisoned and on his way to the bathroom, I snagged him and got ready to move him upstairs to his office to enter the panic room, very carefully waiting for my opening and still almost getting caught, but fortunately getting there in the end, making Mason's final act being opening a door that very well could have saved him. Well, against anyone else it might have. After trying and failing to make a way for his body to go off the balcony and fall all those stories down, I took note of the code and bagged what all was inside the panic room, using the upgraded mantling system to re-enter this specific vent and move the loot safely, as well as myself, getting back to the bedroom and opening the safe inside the vault, grabbing a couple extra bags before getting into scanning that SSD. Very uneventfully. With the SSD now scanned and secured, I made my way to the vent I'd initially entered from, securing all the bags I had managed to squeeze into it in the first place, inevitably leaving some behind as I didn't want to risk anything. I very likely could have gotten everything, but my job was done. It would have been a pretty high fall from grace if I got caught at this point, after all. From the top of the world to the bottom near the water, the next heist is one that's actually getting a rework this month, Turbid Station. As this is likely one of the last times this heist will be visible in this way, I thought I'd go after every bag possible, as well as my 2 targets. The Quant's employee and the area supervisor, both engaging in a plan to use the technology within the trains to convert the drones that currently only have cameras into fully offensive devices to use as they see fit. Of course, that's not something that most people would like to have, so they need to go, as well as the technology they're holding here. Starting off, I went down to the underground tunnel area to see if there were any keys to the train cars down here, not finding any, though I did get one of the solar panels that was down here before being escorted out. Once I was escorted through the door, I did spy one of the yellow panels on a train car I needed to open, seeing what it was and discovering that it just so happened to be a train that had the prototype in it, locked behind the remote control for my first target. How convenient. I went back into the basement for the other solar panels, but ended up getting escorted towards my boat as well as my target, giving him a good nap and letting him sleep with the fishes. I'd return for those solar panels later as I got to work moving around the train yard, opening up the cars one by one and getting the keys to get into each one rather uneventfully, save for when I was about to leave with the loot from the remote control door, dropping a guard and hiding him inside the train instead. Surprisingly, I don't mind the bag moving in this heist all that much, but that's probably because they're in relatively small batches most of the time. This is how you handle a large bag count. But with the first prototype inside the boat, it was time to grab the second one, getting a close scare with my second target as I was retrieving the leftover solar panels. I quickly grabbed him and killed him in an inconspicuous location, eventually adding a dropped guard onto that pile as I couldn't get out of sight in time. Not too big of a deal though, as I still had yet to entertain the idea of searching. With only one train car left and key in hand, I simply needed to open it and bag the second prototype, which I did swiftly, getting back to the boat in pretty good time, all things considered. There might be a bit of a mess to clean up in those train cars though. Next up was an isolated meth lab, which was pretty simple in concept. My targets were the chefs here, making sure they were eliminated so that their recipe wouldn't be passed into the wrong hands. This was also when I was extremely glad I wasn't forcing myself to go after all bags in every heist, as I didn't know how long this build could outlast that perpetual onslaught. I started the heist scoping out the house and seeing where I'd need to defend, and it turned out to be the ground floor, probably the least defensible spot of the three in the heist, but I made do with what I had, finding my targets and deciding to leave them alive for the time being to avoid any NATO-related complications. After working on the first batch of Met, though, I forgot to account for the hostage rescue units, who ended up freeing one of my targets, rendering them invulnerable, and thus prompting a restart. Not my best showing. Fortunately, attempt 2 started a bit better, as I ended up getting the upstairs lab this time, which I could much more easily defend with my motion sensors alerting me to any enemies that came by, as well as good funneling spots for throwing knife kills. I don't really have much else to say about this attempt since it went extremely smoothly, even letting me use the wall-piercing Red Fox AMR to keep the sabotage squad from pulling the lever the second time they tried. Aside from ignoring one batch for too long and letting it burn, which wasn't the end of the world, I didn't really care about the value, this went very smoothly. It turns out that a build focusing on the art of assassination would actually be able to hold up pretty well in a holdout, especially as long as I could remember to get my knives back. Back in the much richer part of NYC, it's time to scour Scry Digital for my next set of targets. Similarly to Mason Laurent, these two are former Murky Water, one working on managing how the new digital warfare goes from the top, and the other managing it from the bottom with the Sins AI. One gives the orders, the other executes them. Both of them need to be taken down. As most runs of Syntax go, I started by going into the side room to get into this vent here, trying to remain maxless for as long as I possibly could, going through the vent and disabling the metal detector for later before getting to the office and finding the code for the basement, putting it in as quickly as possible before going down to see what I was working with. It wasn't too complicated, I just needed to avoid the guards and cameras, get the right keycard, and empty the server rooms one by one. I could have also gone into the side room to see which server rooms I actually needed, but considering I'd need to grab at least 6 bags to be scanned, I figured I might as well grab all of them at that point. Maybe there should be more variety in how many lootable servers are in each of these rooms. It would probably make it more interesting. Slow and steady was the name of the game here, and it was going relatively well, until I tried moving a bunch of bags through the vent connecting to room C, that now housed my target, before being seen by a guard and not wanting to risk his body being discovered, masked up to take him down and have him join my target in the vent. After that, it was time for the scanning to commence. While the bags were scanning, I did ultimately decide to move the non-essential bags up near the door so I wouldn't have to go so far back every time for all the loot, until eventually, the final server scanned and gave me the data I needed, taking it back upstairs and getting a little too cocky with triggering the elevator guard, wasting my second radio of the heist. That's fine though, getting the bags through the vent into the van isn't difficult, it just takes some patience, especially when I'm not allowed to use the zipline bag to make this part go by so much faster. I ended up getting almost all the bags to the van, but then got a little bit of unfortunate timing, grabbing this sieve right as the camera decided to pan over towards me, making the alarm go off right as I got the loot secured in the van. I debated for a little bit on whether this should count, and ultimately decided to restart the heist because I had missed my first target. The second attempt went almost identically to the first, save for actually killing the target upstairs, but a guard that I'd killed earlier got seen, and since I couldn't get there in time, the alarm naturally followed, as well as a restart. Attempt 3 was a bit different as I was getting slightly impatient. I decided to mask up basically straight away, climbing into the bathroom vent and then going through the heist fairly similarly, save for choosing a different path to move bags through as well as getting rid of the upstairs cameras, so I only needed to worry about the civilians outside. Other than that though, this run went very similarly to the first, except I was far more cautious with the civilians, making sure none of them even saw me for long enough to register the weapon I was holding. And annoyingly redoing this one because my footage somehow got corrupted of this third attempt, saying that this, and only that specific attempt, wasn't encoded properly. It's not like I don't enjoy the heist, so I can't really complain. Moving all across the city, it was time to move on to a police station where a corrupt captain was trying to plant evidence with some higher-up catching wind of this, and instead of blowing the whistle directly, they decided to hire 47 to take out the crooked cop and retrieve the forged evidence. They probably didn't trust the courtroom. The first attempt wasn't one that lasted very long, as I got spotted by a camera trying to grab the loot keycard, and since I didn't have much of a choice, I had to kill the cop that saw me, only to have it be seen later by another cop that was escorting me out, at which point I decided to just restart the heist. Once again, discretion is the better part of valor. Attempt 2 went a bit better, as it turns out if you kill the captain, you don't get to place down the box of donuts, which would only serve to make hacking this PC and getting the evidence from his fingerprint much more difficult for me. Nothing that theoretically impractical angles won't fix though, as I was safely on my way to the evidence room at this point, luring the guard that was in there to the back so I could dispatch him easily, lugging the heavy gold out of there with practically no trouble, aside from just how heavy it was. I didn't even need to put on my mask for this heist, the execution was sublime. My next target would take me to the Grand Courthouse, as I was here to free an acquaintance of mine, as well as eliminate the corrupt judge that put him into that situation in the first place. And just to pay no mind to the fact that I've been using the heister that's being freed in this heist for my run so far, and that I'll have to be the other American heister instead for this trip. who, funnily enough, actually has much more thematically fitting responses to the pages when he has to answer them.
Thanks for calling, buddy. I feel much safer now. I'm glad you guys over there at Control are so sharp. Not gullible at all.
Yeah, sounds good.
Since I didn't want to mask up at all during this heist, I had to get the metal detectors taken care of the traditional way, flipping the 4 colored switches and waiting for long enough to not be seen doing it, making sure to slap a motion sensor on the lead guard here so I wouldn't lose track of him while I ran around the courthouse. I needed to gain access to the courtroom itself, so while I could have simply gone and grabbed a press badge, I went ahead and took down the cameras, knowing they'd be quite the pain to deal with if I left them up, grabbing a QR code and somewhat skipping ahead, getting to the judge's chambers and setting up the blackmail form before going to see what I'd need to access the evidence, grabbing both the fingerprint I needed as well as the verification key from the computer. What I didn't expect to bag as well was the body of a guard, nor the innocent woman inside who didn't have any alternative so long as I was in the room. Once that was done, I headed to the digital evidence room, grabbed the first server I could, and lo and behold, it just so happened to be Houston's evidence on the very first one. That was a satisfying, albeit very slow, walk to a phone to blackmail the judge, getting him isolated inside of his chambers. I'd thought about throwing a knife into his head as he walked in, but that would have been far too public an execution. Setting the evidence down so I could move more quickly now, I'd made my way to grab the donuts first, getting that done sooner, and before I went to remove the judge from his position, Mike Reed got the better of me, just barely being seen entering the code for the physical evidence room, leading to one guard falling, and then another, and then another, and then suddenly I had to press the restart button. Second verse, same as the first for the most part. Metal detectors knocked out, press badge grabbed, physical evidence code found, cameras taken down, code entered, and evidence scanned. This time I decided to just put the evidence in the van straight away, making sure not to get distracted by any more extra loot if I could help it. Maybe if I needed to wait for some guards to path away, I'd grab more, but only then. With the evidence secured, I moved on to entering the office, grabbing the blackmail material, using the blackmail material, killing the judge, getting the donuts, going to the basement, freeing Houston, and waiting for all this to finally be over. It's amazing just how simple this heist can be when you're not just spending half of it standing around and waiting for evidence to be scanned. Taking a short break from the more high-profile targets, my goal now was to go into the Diamond District and eliminate the manager of With This Ring, as he suspected the same thing that Ashton Fine had done way back in Dirty Ice. Of course, this is because of the former employee of Ashton Fine acting as a whistleblower, calling out his illegal behavior because it takes one to know one. Starting off on the side of the street with Ashton Fine, I went ahead and grabbed some of the jewelry that I could hold, getting into the side room to grab a QR code from my target's room, and then going to across the street to see if the first building that could hold the scanner was actually holding it, and it turns out it was, meaning all I really needed to do was get enough scan to get out, which turned out to be 6 scan bags, each one filling the bar 15%. Of course, I'd also need to bring Riley back in for questioning, as well as getting the gem in the safe since, after eliminating my target, I looked to see where he'd stashed his most prized possession, turning out to be the Glimmer store instead of his own. So I tried to do something that I definitely couldn't have done at release, and that's moving NPCs by repeatedly throwing bags at them, since otherwise Riley would have stayed still the entire time. But unfortunately for me, and probably fortunately for her, after enough of the bags, the game dragged her into an area I couldn't follow her into, even with the free cam. Definitely one of the most interesting uses of a restart. Second attempt started similarly to the first, go into Ashton Fine, grab the bags, get a QR code, and then look for Riley, who was on her phone against a pole this time. I had an easier time moving her around, but after getting careless trying to grab the blue keycard to remove the cameras, one thing led to another and I had to restart yet again. The third attempt went much more smoothly though. I grabbed the 2 bags from Ashton Fine, found 3 more in the IDE building as well as the scanner, and then grabbed a 6th from With This Ring before going after my target, finding the special gem inside his own safe this time, somehow managing to grab the red keycard for that without even moving the paper. Once everything was scanned and secured though, it was time to secure Riley as well, waiting a little bit for the cameras to go by, but aside from one close call, getting out with no trouble whatsoever. The cleanest jobs are often the ones where you don't need to get your hands dirty, as this was the first one I'd done without killing anyone except for my target. Going to the stock market next, I had a suspicion that this one would end up taking me quite some time, or at least a few restarts, even if my target was relatively simple. He is one of 2 twins in the stock exchange, differentiated by his red keycard that he carries at all times. He's been using his twin's likeness to interfere with the stock exchange, insider trading, and whatnot. Of course, given that this is Agent 47 we're talking about, it's not about simply firing him. A message has to be sent as well. Starting on the roof, I had to find the zipline and the power room for where to go, which wasn't all that complicated as I found the power box rather quickly, with the zipline taking a bit more effort to find. Once I got that though, it was just a matter of going down the elevator and seeing where I was before going to one of the broker firms, which happened to be Jordan Investments. While it was more annoying to hide people here, it did make a bit of my life easier when I saw that my target, as well as his twin, were both next to this firm, making it a simple matter to hide his body. I hacked into the PC, dug through the papers to keep it going, and grabbed the flash drive I'd need from one of the booths. Putting it in and getting the credentials wasn't an issue, neither was getting into the trading hall. What became an issue was when I was slightly seen by someone trying to get the code for the stocks I was reversing from my target, prompting an early restart. My next 3 attempts would follow suit, some of which ended much earlier than others, but it wasn't the end of the world as I went in for a 5th time, admittedly a bit low on patience as I accidentally killed one of the civilians next to my target, getting some pretty good luck this time with where things were, at least until I had to get the EMP in place when all the trading was done. I got caught jumping across the booths by a guard, who I thankfully was able to hide in the exchange room, but setting off the EMP and searching was practically a death warrant in stealth as I got caught right at the elevator, dropping another guard right before ziplining up. I did technically get the stealth escape here, but just like with Dirty Ice and Syntax area before this heist, I decided to spend a few more attempts redoing this for a fully proper stealth clear. The successful attempt wasn't even that eventful, it just happened to be much cleaner than previous attempts, aside from the numerous hostages tied in the rooms guard never patrol into. Moving on to the Year 2 content, First World Bank is up next, and my target for this heist is a rather interesting one. After all, it's the Inside Man. Who did you think was responsible for assassinating him in the first place? Well, as much as I would have loved to have him be killed after completing a stealth run, it turns out he's necessary for it to even be finished, as killing him in the middle of objectives can cause a soft lock, so this would have to be another loud heist inevitably. At least I could get through a majority of the heist before triggering the alarm, so that's exactly what I set out to do. First attempt was pretty simple as I set out to essentially do as much as I could in stealth before things ramped up, since I'd need to go loud, so I pushed as far as I thought I could in stealth before triggering the alarm, which was opening the safe. In order to do that, I got the Inside Man to help me, rewriting his log entries, disabling the metal detector, and then making a code for the safe. Once the gate to the vault area was disabled, I followed him to where he went afterwards, which happened to be his office, and eliminated him. From there, I continued the heist in stealth, getting to the point where I had the vault open and all the loot secured inside the money carts, but since the Inside Man couldn't lower me through this platform, the heist was pretty much locked at this point, so I had to restart and trigger the alarm much earlier this time. Everything went the same this time as well, aside from me deliberately walking into one of the lasers in the hall to the vault, starting loud when I needed to grab the thermite to burn through the vault roof. It wasn't going all that badly, at least until the FBI assault began and I thought I took care of it, but apparently I didn't, and that would ultimately cause too much pressure to cave in on me, leading to a rather frustrating failure. Before I tried to attempt this heist a 3rd time, I decided to run a little experiment to see just how far the limits of the soft lock were, seeing if putting the stickers on the money carts before raising the alarm let the loud detectives go through, which it turns out they don't. In other words, if you go loud after getting through the vault gate and the Inside Man is dead, which isn't likely to happen without doing that deliberately to be fair, you will be soft lock. Now that that little experiment's out of the way, attempt 3 was going pretty well, save for the fact that doing everything just to get into the vault room took nearly 8 minutes. If this heist didn't take so long to get from point A to point B, I might play it more often, but this is draining. Once the Inside Man scanned his eyes, though, he got to close them permanently as I threw a knife into his cranium, before setting off the lasers to avoid a soft lock. This attempt went very similar to the last, aside from not getting the FBI van at all this time, and instead having to deal with final charge in the vault, and somehow surviving even more dozers in this time than in the FBI assault. Throwing knives giving me overheal was the only thing keeping me from getting absolutely walloped in these loud heists, especially since I could easily retrieve them for reuse just by not acing Knife Expert. I did get slightly unlucky with the vent placement, but moving the bags in trips of 5 at a time did make it more tolerable, especially since the actual waves of cops were much easier now that the FBI van wasn't shown up. Once all the bags were secured and I managed to get my broken armor plate back from a techie, I just needed to fight my way through to the basement after blowing up the wall, which was nowhere near as tense as I expected until I ran out of ammo and my overkill weapon in front of a dozer as I threw down my second medic bag next to the van and feverishly guzzled everything in it so I wouldn't go down at the very last second. That's certainly a way to end this heist. That's for sure. Thankfully, the rest of the heist from Year 2 can be completed fully in stealth despite killing NPCs, but in Party Powder, there aren't actually any civilians in the heist. So you're probably wondering who I'd make my target here, and it's the guy watching the cameras, as he's deliberately doctoring footage to make sure the higher-ups at the station don't catch on to the illicit activities of these corrupt cops. Yeah, I know going after the camera guy is probably the easiest one to go for, but let's be entirely honest here. Who else realistically qualifies as a specific target at Party Powder? On my first attempt at this heist, I'll admit that I somewhat tunnel visioned on getting all of the loot in the heist, somewhat forgetting about the challenge run and just playing the heist as per usual, emptying out the warehouse with the miniature safe and killing one of the cops inside, securing nearly enough to escape until it was enough after cooking some meth. When I tried to empty out the other warehouse, though, it wasn't nearly as smooth, trying to get the last few bags that I really didn't need, ending up triggering the alarm. I was able to get all the bags except for the one batch of meth at least, getting body blocked from a life-saving zapper kill at the last second. It wasn't going to count anyway, but dying that way just felt even worse. Attempt 2 went much more smoothly as I decided to focus on getting a blue keycard so I could actually assassinate my target, carefully grabbing some QR codes in the process for the main warehouse I was going to focus on emptying for all my loot. There's no reason for me to stick around and cook meth if I could help it. I worked on getting the blue keycard containers outside of the warehouse opened up, but no luck in either one, so I just focused on going through the routine of looting every single bag inside of my preferred warehouse, as well as an extra container outside to make sure I could hit minimum loot. With most of the loot secured, I went ahead and moved on to the other side of the heist, opening the third empty keycard container, and then of course, my target happened to be in the fourth and final container, as I took him out with ease. Unfortunately, because of how much I'd been running and causing guards to investigate my noise, one of the cops saw my last bag of loot inside the warehouse and was about to sound the alarm. But the alarm was unfortunately going to sound anyway, as I had no radios left at that point. At least now I knew for certain how many bags were needed to just leave the heist. Attempt 3 went even smoother than that one, as I worked my way around the warehouse I was going to primarily empty, getting in without much trouble and emptying it of everything it had shortly after. Once everything was at least bagged, I decided to try and start looking for my target after snagging a convenient blue keycard from this nice cop here. And surprisingly, he was in the very first container I opened. I was able to answer the radio after a little trouble with the door and fully empty the first warehouse, but I needed just one more bag to get the minimum loot requirements, so I went for the safest option that wasn't cooking meth of entering the other warehouse from the ground level entrance, since that's where a locker with a money bag always spawns, as well as half the crates that could contain the white stuff in that whole warehouse. Aside from being shown the dance of the guard people by this random cop who scared me into thinking I need to restart again for about 5 seconds, this was a very simple clear once I stopped playing like a moron. Similarly to Party Powder before it, choosing a target and delivery charge was more of a matter of who was even there in the first place, as, really, I could only pick with the old mechanic in the garage, suspected of sabotaging the vehicles of the Palatucci's, and they want him gone for it. I was already a bit nervous about this heist as I started on the side of the warehouse that I wasn't too fond of, and even more so when Shade informed me all the money was moved into the vault, meaning the only thing I'd be able to find without the red keycard were the 3 paintings. For better or worse though, this run didn't last long, as in the process of trying to put a motion sensor onto a guard, the lead guard saw me doing that, and since him seeing you is essentially guaranteed failure, that's gotta be a record in how quickly I've reset in this run. The second attempt started uncannily similarly to the first, with the starting location, loot in the vault, and the first painting all being exactly the same. I did get different super secure points at least, even if I had to give the fish some food with this guard's body afterwards. He's doing a good job even in the afterlife. Once that was done, I made my way to my target, struggling more than I'd like to admit in terms of moving his body into the vent to hide it with my shotgun, but at the very least Shade had some good news in the form of an armored transport arriving soon, meaning I might not need to go into the vault after all. But just to play it safe, I went to the main storage area and found the second painting on the way to the other room that could have the camera guard, quickly dispatching him so I'd have an easier time securing my payment. I even found the third painting in the process, which did make me feel a little better. Going outside to see where the transport was, I did eventually find it, but had to loop back around the opposite direction where I'd come from to get there, though I was able to secure the paintings and loot everything in the transport, with the last bags inside being just barely not enough to count for minimum loot, so I'd have to try my luck inside the building, which wasn't too difficult as I'd already obtained the red keycard. I did only as much as necessary, going into this one counting room and disabling a die pack on a large money pile, which turned out to be exactly enough for me to escape. The less I have to think about the vault in this heist, the better, I say. The final heist of this challenge run is the Palatucci-owned mall, as this was a kidnapping issued by the Payday gang against Pietro Palatucci. One of their members, Wolf, really wants to have a nice chat with him. This is also the only heist I'm allowed to use a favor in, specifically to get Pietro to spawn in the first place. This was the part of the run I was also dreading the most, as I'd need to get Pietro all the way from Nobleman Lounge to the getaway with this build that's barely equipped for something as difficult as that. Of course, in order to kidnap the main man of the Palatucci's, I'd need to figure out what Pietro was selling and get a bit of that product out of his hands. Conveniently, the goods were also in the Nobleman Lounge, as I found out, so on the way to the lounge, I kept a close eye on where the guards were going and what their routes were so I could figure out exactly how to get Pietro out of there. Just barely avoiding detection, I managed to open the food storage area of the lounge, deciding my main priority right now should be getting the cameras down, as those would likely cause me the most issue when trying to move Pietro from the lounge. Of course, since the camera room wasn't next to the lounge, I had to go all the way back to the elevator I came from, getting escorted through the latter half of the trip before I could make sure I wasn't caught on tape ever again. Making my way back to the lounge, I did unfortunately get seen by the guard patrolling inside and had to drop him with a spare knife I had, but after the funeral for my F-key, I started moving the loot to the drop-off point, just barely avoiding a restart as it was barely on the precipice of being caught in a secure area, but thankfully only being escorted to the elevator next to said drop-off point. I repeated this, with fewer close calls of course, until the minimum loot was secured and I could escape, but now was the time to grab Pietro. I masked up, grabbed him, and mentally prepared to wait for a while as I had to keep a careful eye on every guard I'd put a motion sensor on to see what their movement patterns were, waiting for the perfect time to move my meat shield. It took a while. I had quite the conversation with this piece of furniture here during the time it took for me to get a good pattern on the lead guard, but eventually, after a lot of waiting and movements I probably shouldn't have gotten away with, I managed to actually get Pietro out of there without even killing a single guard on the way. With Pietro out of the picture though, it was time for me to take my leave as well, as Agent 47 had done his last job in NYC for the time being. It might not have been a typical assassination, but you can't say he wasn't a professional about it. The question this challenge run raised was one of whether I could beat the entirety of Payday 3's main heist with a build that only really had one singular stealth skill, as well as killing or kidnapping a specific NPC in each one. And while I did struggle at points, it was certainly an interesting twist on the usual gameplay of Payday 3. It makes me wish contracts were like this, specific versions of a heist that had an extra gimmick to replay it for. The build, while mimicking both the pros and cons of playing as Agent 47 in his proprietary series, was fun when I managed to adapt to it in loud. The difference in a throwing knife build when only a single skill has changed is honestly insane to me, but I'm glad I got to experience it, and I recommend you guys try out the build as well, and maybe the challenge too. Until next time, I pray you don't have to see Agent 47 in person. If you do, well, you've already seen his handiwork enough through here. You know what happens next.